By late 1944, the Luftwaffe had introduced jets into combat, machines that could outrun anything the Allies fielded. Yet within months, these technological marvels began falling from the sky with alarming regularity. The weapon that brought them down was not another jet, but an understanding of physics older than flight itself. Energy cannot be negotiated, only spent or conserved. One American squadron proved that speed without discipline is just another way to die. January 12, 1945, Rheinbach Airfield, Western Germany. The sound came first. Not the scream of a Messerschmitt's Daimler-Benz engine, nor the whistling tear of a diving thunderbolt. This was different. A low, converging hum that seemed to come from two directions at once, growing not louder but denser, like the air itself was being pressed into a single killing line. Oberleutnant Franz Steiger heard it 3 seconds before he saw the shadow. He was pulling out of his landing approach, gear down, flaps extended. The Me-262 bleeding speed as the runway expanded beneath him. His wingman had already touched down. The circuit was clear. The sky, for once, was theirs. Then the hum sharpened into a roar. The P-38 Lightning came from above and behind, not chasing but descending. Both Allison engines synchronized in a sound that had no precedent in Steiger's war. It did not curve. It did not hesitate. It fell like a thrown spear, straight and fast, closing the geometry in a way that gave him no time to think, only to react. And reaction, at 180 knots with the gear down, was a prayer wrapped in aluminum. The first burst missed by inches. Steiger felt the pressure wave more than heard it. 450 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all firing from the nose, all converging on a point in space his aircraft was about to occupy. He shoved the throttles forward, but the turbines took time to spool, and time was the one thing the geometry would not give him. The second burst did not miss. Cannon rounds punched through the left stabilizer, the impact precise and surgical. No explosion, no fire, just the sudden sickening wobble of an airframe that had lost its authority over the air. Steiger's hands moved on instinct, trimming against the yaw, but the controls felt soft, distant, like trying to steer through water. The P-38 did not stay to watch. It climbed. Not a turn. Not a victory roll. Just a pure, vertical zoom. The twin-boom silhouette shrinking into the pale winter sky as if it had never been there at all. No waste. No theater. The attack had lasted less than 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds Steiger understood something he had not been taught in any briefing. The age of the chase was over. He nursed the jet down, the landing gear screaming against the crosswind, the runway rushing up too fast. The wheels hit hard, once, twice, the airframe shuddering as he fought to keep it straight. He rolled to a stop at the far end of the field, hands still locked on the stick, breath coming in shallow pulls. Ground crew sprinted toward him, but Steiger did not move. He stared through the canopy at the empty sky, replaying the geometry in his mind, the angle, the speed, the timing. It had not been a duel. It had been a calculation, and he had been on the wrong side of the equation. His wingman's voice crackled over the radio, shaken and thin. What the hell was that? Steiger did not answer immediately. He looked at the hole in his stabilizer, the torn metal bright against the winter light. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, drained of the confidence that had carried him through 2 years of combat. That, he said, was the future. The ground crew pulled him from the cockpit. He let them. His legs felt unsteady, not from fear, but from the sudden, disorienting clarity that comes when a belief collapses all at once. He had flown the fastest operational fighter in the world, and it had not mattered. Speed, he realized, was not the same as control. And control, in the hands of a patient enemy, was absolute. Across the field, mechanics gathered around the damaged jet, pointing at the holes, measuring angles, trying to understand how a twin-engine fighter, a plane they had been told was too heavy, too slow to turn, had done this. But the answer was not in the aircraft. It was in the method. The P-38 had not tried to outmaneuver him. It had simply waited for the moment when evasion became impossible, then executed with the cold efficiency of a closing trap. Steiger walked to the operations tent, his flight suit still damp with sweat. Inside, other pilots were gathered, their faces pale, their conversations low and tight. 3 encounters that morning. 3 jets caught in the circuit. 2 damaged. 1 lost. The pattern was undeniable now. Someone asked if the Americans had gotten lucky. Steiger shook his head. Luck implied randomness. What he had experienced was the opposite. Ruthless, repeatable precision. They had not been hunted. They had been harvested. And the realization that settled over the room, unspoken but shared, was this. Running was no longer enough. The Americans had found the seam in the jet's armor, and it was not a flaw in the machine. It was a flaw in time itself. The moment when speed had to become stillness. The moment when a pilot had to choose the ground over the sky. That sliver of vulnerability, so brief it barely registered as a tactical concern, had become a kill zone, and the P-38 crews had learned to live inside it. Steiger lit a cigarette with hands that did not quite shake but no longer felt entirely his own. Outside, the winter sun was low and cold, casting long shadows across the airfield. Somewhere above, invisible and patient, the Americans were still up there, waiting for the next plane to slow down. The war had taught him many things, but this lesson arrived with a different weight. It was not about courage or skill or even luck. It was about arithmetic. Energy spent versus energy conserved. Altitude traded for speed. Speed traded for position. Position held until the mathematics allowed for nothing else. He exhaled smoke into the freezing air and thought about the sound he had heard. That twin-engine hum, descending from altitude, patient and final. It was the sound of a question being answered before it could even be asked, and the answer was always the same. 3 weeks earlier, December 20th, 1944, RAF Debden, England. Captain Avery Cole stood in front of a chalkboard covered in angles, vectors, and altitude brackets. His audience, 12 P-38 pilots from the 55th Fighter Group, sat in folding chairs, flight suits still smelling of hydraulic fluid and cold sweat. They had just returned from a sweep over the Rhineland, and the mood was somewhere between exhaustion and frustration. The Messerschmitt 262 had appeared twice that morning. Both times it had simply accelerated away, untouchable, a blur of gray metal that mocked every pursuit curve they attempted. The feeling of impotence was new, and it grated. Cole tapped the chalkboard with a piece of chalk, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Forget the turn," he said. "Forget the climb. Forget everything you know about dogfighting." Someone in the back muttered something about easier said than done. Cole ignored it. "The 262 is faster than us in level flight. It climbs better. It accelerates better. If we chase it, we lose. If we try to outturn it at high speed, we lose. If we try to catch it on the deck, we lose." He paused, letting the litany of disadvantages settle. "But it has one vulnerability, and it happens twice every sortie." He drew a line on the board, horizontal, representing an airfield. Then he added 2 arcs, one descending, one ascending. Takeoff, landing. The jet has to slow down. The jet has to commit to a predictable path. And in that window, it's not faster than us. It's a target. Lieutenant Marsh, a veteran of 40 missions, leaned forward. "You're talking about hitting them in the circuit. That's a flak nest. That's suicide." Cole did not flinch. "It's suicide if you loiter. It's not suicide if you time it right." He circled the descending arc. "They come in fast, gear down, flaps out. Energy state drops to nothing. If we're already above them, already diving, we don't chase, we intercept. Geometry, not speed." The room was silent now, the skepticism shifting into something more cautious. "Calculation. 2 sections," Cole continued. "High and low. Low section makes the appearance, draws eyes, draws reactions. High section holds energy in reserve, waits for the commit. When the target slows, the high section dives. Boom. Zoom. We're gone before the flak can track." Marsh crossed his arms. "And if they don't take the bait? Then we don't engage. We reset. The doctrine is simple. Don't pursue. Anticipate." He wrote it on the board in block letters. Don't pursue. Anticipate. This isn't about being brave. It's about being patient. The 262 pilot thinks he controls the fight because he controls the speed. But speed is only useful if you have space. In the circuit, space collapses, time collapses, and that's where we live. The pilots exchanged glances. It was not the kind of tactic they had trained for. Fighter pilots were taught aggression, pursuit, the thrill of the chase. This was something colder. Ambush, execution. It required discipline over instinct, patience over courage. But the mathematics were undeniable. December 28, 1944. Forward Operating Base, Belgium. The P-38's sat in revetments along the frozen taxiway, their twin booms catching the pale morning light. Ground crews worked in silence, loading ammunition belts, checking oxygen lines, scraping frost from canopies. The air smelled of aviation fuel and snow. Cole walked the line, checking each aircraft, each pilot. His own Lightning, marked with 32 kill crosses, sat at the far end, engines already warming. He climbed into the cockpit, settled into the seat, and began the pre-flight ritual with the same mechanical precision he demanded from his tactics. Throttles, mixture, props, fuel. The Allison engines coughed, caught, settled into their low, syncopated rumble. He let them warm, watching the gauges, feeling the vibration through the control column. The P-38 was not a graceful aircraft. It was heavy, stable, and unforgiving of mistakes. But it had one advantage that mattered more than agility. It could convert altitude into speed faster than almost anything in the sky, and it could climb back out just as quickly. Energy management. That was the key. Other fighters turned. The P-38 fell and rose, a predator that hunted in the vertical plane. The radio crackled. All Falcon elements check in. One by one, the pilots responded. Cole listened to the voices, calm and professional, and felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came before every mission. Not fear, readiness. The awareness that the next 2 hours would be governed entirely by decisions measured in fractions of seconds. Falcon lead, this is Falcon 3. We really doing this? Cole keyed the mic. We're really doing this. High section holds 20,000 feet. Low section shows at 12. Stay cold until the commit. When it happens fast. And if they don't commit, then we go home and try again tomorrow. This only works if we control when it starts. The engines spooled up. One by one, the P-38's taxied out, their twin tails swaying slightly in the crosswind. Cole watched them line up, spacing perfect, discipline holding. He had chosen these pilots carefully, not the hot shots, not the glory hunters, but the ones who understood that war was arithmetic dressed in violence. They lifted off in pairs, the lightnings clawing into the gray winter sky, climbing steadily toward altitude. Below, the landscape unfolded in patches of snow and frozen forest, the scars of war stitched across the earth in cratered roads and abandoned vehicles. At 15,000 feet, Cole checked his oxygen, his fuel, his gun switches. Everything in place. Everything ready. The radio crackled again, this time from intelligence relay. Falcon lead. Radar shows multiple bandits inbound to Rheinbach. Estimated 6 contacts, high speed, descending to circuit altitude. Cole felt the tension sharpen. 6. That meant at least 2 would be 262s, possibly more. The rest would be conventional fighters, 109s or 190s flying cover. It did not matter. The target was not the aircraft. It was the moment. Falcon elements, split now. High section, continue climb to 22,000. Low section, level at 12 and drift east. Make noise. The formation split cleanly. 4 P-38's climbing, 4 leveling off. Cole watched the altimeter wind upward, the air thinning, the engines laboring slightly despite the turbo superchargers. At 22,000 feet, he leveled off and throttled back, preserving fuel, preserving energy. Below, the low section began broadcasting on open channels, simulating distress, confusion, anything to draw attention. The bait was set. Now came the hardest part. Waiting. Minutes stretched. The sky remained empty, a pale expanse of clouds and cold light. Cole scanned the horizon, eyes moving in a trained pattern. Left, center, right, check 6, repeat. His hands rested lightly on the controls, ready but not tense. The radio broke the silence. Falcon lead, contacts breaking through clouds, Angels 10, heading west. 2 fast movers, 4 escorts. Cole keyed the mic. High section eyes on? Negative. Still searching. Low section status. We see them, they see us, they're splitting. 2 breaking toward us, 4 continuing to base. This was the moment. The decision tree collapsed into a single branch. Low section, break south. Don't engage. High section, follow my lead. We take the 2 heading home. The P-38's banked hard, noses dropping slightly, energy bleeding off just enough to begin the dive. Cole checked his airspeed, 220 knots and climbing, the altimeter unwound. 21,000. 20,000. The world tilted, the horizon rising as the lightning fell. Below, 2 shapes emerged from the cloud deck fast and clean. Me-262s, gear still up, running for the safety of the airfield. They had seen the low section and dismissed them as no threat. Why wouldn't they? They were faster, they were untouchable. Cole smiled, a cold, humorless expression. Falcon 2, take the trailer. I have the leader. On my mark. The dive steepened. The airspeed climbed past 300 knots, the controls stiffening, the airframe humming with speed. The dive flaps deployed automatically, keeping the nose stable, preventing compressibility. This was what the P-38 was built for, controlled violence in a straight line. The jets were closer now, their shapes resolving into details. Swept wings, potted engines, beautiful machines, fast and deadly. But they were slowing. The airfield was ahead. The circuit was waiting. Mark. The P-38's rolled inverted and pulled through, the G-forces pressing Cole into his seat. The world spun, steadied, and suddenly the jets were there, directly ahead, growing larger in the gun sight. 4 seconds to firing range. 3, 2. The lead jet began his turn to downwind. Gear doors opening. 1. Cole pressed the trigger. The cannon rounds left the nose at 2,800 feet per second, converging on a point in space the Messerschmitt 262 was about to occupy. There was no spread. No guesswork. The P-38's concentrated armament meant every weapon fired along the same axis, creating a cone of destruction so tight it functioned almost like a single massive gun. The first burst struck the jet's left engine nacelle. Metal tore. Fuel mist ignited. The explosion was small, almost polite, a brief flash followed by a trail of black smoke. The jet did not break apart. It simply lost symmetry, the left side dragging, the right engine screaming as the pilot fought to compensate. But there was no compensation at 220 knots with the gear coming down. Cole held the trigger for 2 seconds, then released. The P-38 was already climbing, the nose pitching up sharply, the Allison engines roaring as he converted speed back into altitude. The dive flaps retracted. The airframe groaned under the G-load but held. At 400 knots indicated, the Lightning climbed like it had been launched, the earth falling away beneath him. No pursuit, no confirmation. Just the zoom, pure and clean, back into the sanctuary of altitude. Behind him, the jet pilot made his choice. He could try to land with one engine, or he could punch out. Records indicate he chose the latter. The canopy blew, the seat fired, and the parachute opened at 800 feet, just enough altitude to survive. The Messerschmitt hit the ground outside the airfield perimeter and burned. Cole leveled off at 18,000 feet, scanning for threats, checking fuel, resetting his mental clock. The entire engagement had lasted 11 seconds from trigger pull to zoom climb. He keyed the mic. Falcon 2, status? Splash 1, clean exit, rejoining. Falcon lead copies. All elements, reform at 20,000. We're not done. The P-38 circled, climbing, waiting. Below, the airfield was in chaos. Smoke rose from the crash site. Flak batteries fired blindly into the sky, too late, too scattered. The Germans had not anticipated an attack from above, had not imagined anyone would be foolish enough to dive into their defensive envelope. But the Americans had not dived into it. They had dived through it faster than the guns could track, and climbed out before the response could organize. The mathematics were brutal and simple. A P-38 at 22,000 feet carried potential energy. A jet at 5,000 feet, slowing for landing, carried almost none. The dive converted potential into kinetic. The attack spent kinetic in a 2-second burst, and the zoom climb converted the remaining kinetic back into potential. Energy in, energy out. The books balanced. The jet, by contrast, had spent its energy accelerating away from earlier threats, then spent more slowing for the circuit. It had nothing left when the P-38 arrived. It was not a question of skill or courage. It was physics, patient and absolute. Intelligence reports from that period describe a shift in German radio traffic. Pilots began requesting extended loiter time before landing. Controllers began spacing arrivals more carefully. Flak crews were ordered to maintain 360-degree coverage at all times. But the adjustments revealed something more telling than tactical adaptation. They revealed fear. Not the sharp, immediate fear of combat, but the deeper, corrosive fear that comes from recognizing a pattern you cannot escape. The jets were still faster. The jets were still deadly. But twice per sortie, they became vulnerable, and the Americans had learned to wait for those moments with the patience of a sniper. Cole orbited at altitude, watching the airfield below. 2 more jets appeared on the horizon, running low and fast. He checked his fuel. Enough for 1 more pass, maybe 2. Falcon elements, new contacts inbound. Low section, can you make another appearance? Affirmative, lead. We're set. The ballet repeated. Low section drifted into view, visible but not threatening. The jets saw them, calculated the geometry, and dismissed the threat. Why engage a slower opponent when the airfield was 5 minutes away? But high above, invisible against the pale sky, Cole and his wingman were already rolling into the dive. This time the target was a pilot with more experience. He saw the P-38's coming, saw the angles collapsing, and made a decision that should have saved him. He shoved the throttles forward, trying to accelerate out of the trap, trading altitude for speed in a desperate bid to outrun the attack. It was the right instinct. But instincts are slower than mathematics. The P-38's were already diving, already accelerating. The jet was accelerating from a lower energy state. The closure rate was inevitable. Cole did not even need to adjust his angle. He simply waited for the range to close, then fired. The burst caught the jet along the fuselage, cannon rounds punching through the thin aluminum skin. No fire, no explosion, just structural damage, the kind that makes an aircraft unflyable but leaves the pilot alive to think about what happened. The jet pilot ejected. His parachute opened. He drifted down into the snow-covered fields, watching the P-38 climb away, watching his aircraft tumble and crash, and perhaps understanding in that long descent that his speed had betrayed him. He had run towards safety, and in doing so had run into the trap. Cole climbed back to altitude, throttled back and resumed the orbit. His hands were steady. His breathing was controlled. There was no adrenaline surge, no triumph. Just the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved through preparation and patience. The radio crackled. Falcon lead, 3rd contact turning away. He's not coming in. Cole watched the distant speck on the horizon, the lone jet climbing, accelerating, choosing survival over the mission. Smart. The pilot had learned. Let him go. Fuel state? 15 minutes. Roger, we're done here. Form up and head home. The P-38's gathered into formation, turned west, and began the long flight back to base. Below, the German airfield was a scene of confusion and damage. 2 jets destroyed, 1 pilot dead, 2 more shaken. But the real damage was not in metal or bodies. It was in the realization, spreading through briefing rooms and operations centers, that the jet's advantage had been neutralized, not eliminated, but neutralized. The 262 was still the fastest thing in the sky, but speed without sanctuary was just another way to die tired. In the days that followed, reports from other sectors confirmed the pattern. P-38 squadrons across the theater began adopting Cole's tactics. The boom and zoom was not new, but the application was. Instead of chasing, they waited. Instead of reacting, they anticipated. The jets were forced to alter their entire operational doctrine, shortening circuits, staggering arrivals, burning extra fuel to maintain defensive speeds. Every adjustment reduced their effectiveness. Every precaution reduced their sortie rate. The jet remained a technical marvel, but the tactical equation had shifted. Cole landed at dusk, the P-38 settling onto the frozen runway with the heavy grace of a machine that had been pushed hard and held together. He taxied to the revetment, shut down the engines, and sat in the silence for a moment, listening to the metal tick as it cooled. His crew chief climbed onto the wing, grinning. "Two more, Captain?" Cole nodded, unstrapping, pulling himself out of the cockpit. His legs were stiff, his back ached, but his mind was clear. He had not won a dogfight. He had not outflown anyone. He had simply waited for the mathematics to align, then executed. Later, in the debriefing, he drew the same vectors on the same chalkboard, walking the other pilots through each decision point. Where to wait, when to dive, how to zoom. The doctrine was crystallizing into something repeatable, something that could be taught. "Don't pursue," he said, writing it again for emphasis. "Anticipate." The words hung in the room, simple and absolute. One pilot raised his hand. "What if they stop landing at forward bases? What if they pull back?" Cole smiled, a thin, cold expression. "Then we've already won. A jet that can't land where it's needed is just an expensive way to waste fuel." The room was quiet. The lesson had been learned, not just by the Americans, but by the enemy. The 262 was still a threat, but it was no longer an invincible one. And in war, the removal of invincibility is often more demoralizing than defeat itself. January 15, 1945. The pattern had become undeniable. Across the shrinking perimeter of the Third Reich, Luftwaffe operations officers stared at loss reports that defied conventional analysis. The Messerschmitt 262, designed to restore air superiority through sheer speed, was being shot down with increasing regularity. Not in high-altitude dogfights, not in head-on passes, but in the circuit, in the final approach, in the 30 seconds between commitment and touchdown. The most advanced fighter in the world was being killed at its most vulnerable, and the weapon doing the killing was a twin-engine design the Germans had dismissed as obsolete 2 years earlier. In Berlin, Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring demanded explanations. His staff provided statistics instead. Sortie rates for the 262 were dropping. Pilot requests for transfer away from jet units were increasing. Most damning of all, experienced aces were refusing to engage American fighters near their own airfields, citing unacceptable risk during recovery operations. The psychological impact was spreading faster than the tactical one. Meanwhile, at Rheinbach, Oberleutnant Franz Steiger sat in a briefing room that smelled of cigarette smoke and cold sweat. His wing commander stood at the front, a man whose face had aged a decade in 3 weeks. The orders he delivered were precise, defensive, and completely contrary to every offensive doctrine the Luftwaffe had been built upon. Effective immediately, all 262 sorties will maintain combat speed until visual confirmation of clear airspace above the field. Landing circuits will be randomized. No fixed patterns. No predictable altitudes. Defensive flights will maintain high cover throughout all recovery operations. A pilot in the back spoke up, his voice tight. "That cuts our operational time in half. The fuel burn alone is acceptable," the commander interrupted, "compared to the alternative." The alternative. No one needed to say it aloud. The alternative was arriving at the field with confidence, lowering the gear, and dying before the wheels touched asphalt. Steiger stared at the tactical map on the wall, the red circles marking American fighter activity. They were not concentrated over targets or strategic routes. They were concentrated over Luftwaffe airfields. The Americans had stopped hunting in open sky. They were hunting at the threshold. It was a reversal so complete it bordered on the absurd. The predator had become prey, and the only defense was to stop behaving like a predator at all. Across the Atlantic, in a strategy room at 8th Air Force Headquarters, analysts were compiling reports that would reshape fighter doctrine for the next generation. The data was clear. The P-38, when employed with energy management tactics, had achieved a kill ratio against jets that exceeded anything accomplished through traditional dogfighting methods. One report noted the psychological component. German pilots are observed breaking off engagements prematurely, even when holding superior position. Combat film shows hesitation during pursuit phases, suggesting learned avoidance behavior. Learned avoidance behavior. The clinical phrase concealed a brutal truth. The Luftwaffe's most experienced pilots, men who had survived years of combat, were now afraid to fly their own missions to completion. Back at RAF Debden, Captain Avery Cole stood in front of a new class of P-38 pilots, men fresh from the States, their flight suits still stiff with newness. He walked them through the doctrine, step by step, vector by vector, the chalkboard filled with altitude blocks and energy curves. "The 262 is faster than you in level flight," he said, repeating the lesson for the 4th time that week. "It climbs faster. It accelerates faster. None of that matters if you don't chase it." One pilot raised his hand. "Sir, how do we know when to dive?" Cole's answer was immediate. "When the target commits to deceleration. Gear down, flaps out, pattern entry. Those are commitments. The jet cannot reverse them quickly. That's your window, 2 to 3 seconds. You fire, you zoom, you're gone. And if we miss, you don't loiter to try again. You climb out, reset, wait for the next opportunity. Patience is the weapon. Energy is the ammunition. You spend both wisely or you don't come home." The pilots absorbed the lesson with the kind of focus that comes from knowing their lives would depend on its application. This was not theory. This was survival mathematics, proven in combat, refined through repetition. Later that day, Cole flew his 48th mission. The target was an airfield near Kassel, intelligence indicating regular 262 activity. He climbed to 24,000 feet, throttled back, and waited. The low section made their appearance right on schedule. 2 P-38's drifting across the horizon at 12,000 feet, slow and visible. The bait. German radar picked them up immediately. Response was textbook. 4 Bf-109s scrambled to intercept, climbing hard, eager to engage what appeared to be an isolated section. But the 109s were not the target. 10 minutes later, a lone Me-262 appeared, running low and fast toward the field. The pilot had seen the fight developing above and chosen to slip underneath, heading for home while the Americans were occupied. It was good tactical thinking. It would have worked against any other doctrine. Cole rolled inverted and pulled through, the dive beginning smooth and controlled. His wingmen followed, the 2 P-38's falling in perfect formation, their descent invisible against the sun, the altimeter unwound. 22,000, 20,000, 18,000. The jet was closer now, beginning its turn to downwind. Gear doors opening. Cole adjusted his angle slightly, compensating for wind, for the jet's deceleration, for the curvature of its flight path. He was not aiming at where the jet was. He was aiming at where it would be in 4 seconds, geometry and time intersecting at a single point. At 8,000 feet, he began to pull out of the dive, the nose rising, the gun sight settling on the target. The airspeed was 420 knots. The closure rate was absurd. The range collapsed from 800 yards to 400 in the space of a breath. The jet pilot never saw them. The attack came from his 6 o'clock high, the one angle he could not check while managing the landing. The first indication he had of danger was the sound of cannon fire already too late. Cole's burst was surgical. 2 seconds, wing route to fuselage. The 20mm rounds punched through aluminum and hydraulics, severing control lines, fracturing structure. The jet did not explode. It simply stopped flying, the nose dropping, the wings losing lift. The pilot ejected at 300 feet, barely enough altitude. The parachute deployed. The pilot hit the ground hard, survived. His jet augured in beside the runway and burned, the flames visible for miles. Cole was already climbing, the zoom taking him back through 15,000 feet before the flak could even track his position. Clean, efficient, no wasted motion. He keyed the mic. Splash 1. Egressing west. The P-38's reformed at altitude and turned for home. Below, the airfield was in chaos again. Crash crews, ambulances, pilots standing in small groups, staring at the sky, trying to understand how this kept happening. In operations centers across Germany, the reports accumulated. Another jet lost in the circuit. Another pilot shaken. Another airfield deemed unsafe for recovery without prohibitive defensive measures. The collapse was not dramatic. There was no single decisive battle, no moment where the Luftwaffe admitted defeat, but the numbers told the story. Jet sorties decreased, fuel consumption increased, pilot morale deteriorated. The Tu-62 remained a technical achievement, but its operational effectiveness had been gutted by a tactic so simple it could be taught in an afternoon. Don't pursue, anticipate. By late January, German standing orders included a provision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Jet pilots were authorized to divert to alternate fields if American fighters were observed at altitude near their home base. Authorization to run. Authorization to survive rather than fight. The predator had learned to flee its prey. Steiger flew his last mission on January 28th. He completed the sortie without incident, but as he approached Rheinbach, he saw them. 2 P-38’s, high and distant, circling like vultures. He did not attempt to land. He diverted 30 miles east, burned extra fuel he could not afford, and touched down at a secondary field with his tanks nearly dry. When he climbed out of the cockpit, his hands were shaking. Not from fear of combat, from exhaustion, from the grinding psychological weight of knowing that every approach, every landing, every moment of vulnerability was a potential execution. The jet had made him faster than his enemies, but it had not made him safe, and safety in the end was the only currency that mattered. February 1945. The war was entering its final, brutal phase. The Third Reich was collapsing under the weight of multiple fronts, shattered logistics, and the slow, mathematical certainty of defeat. Yet even in collapse, the Luftwaffe possessed technical superiority in one domain: jet propulsion. It did not matter. The Me-262 remained the fastest operational fighter in any air force. Its pilots were experienced, its design was sound, and its potential was enormous. But potential is not the same as effectiveness. And effectiveness in war is measured not by capability, but by results. The results were unambiguous. By February, 262 losses in the landing circuit exceeded losses in air-to-air combat. The most advanced weapon system Germany possessed was being neutralized not by superior technology, but by superior thinking. Captain Avery Cole understood this in a way few others did. In a letter to a fellow officer, later declassified, he wrote, "We did not defeat the jet, we defeated the clock. Every aircraft, no matter how fast, must eventually slow down. That moment of deceleration is not a weakness in the machine. It is a weakness in time itself. And time, unlike steel, cannot be armored." The philosophy was spreading through the Allied fighter forces like doctrine, but it was more than doctrine. It was a shift in how fighter pilots understood their role. For decades, air combat had been romanticized as a test of skill, courage, and reflexes. The ace was the man who could outturn, outclimb, outshoot his opponent in the chaos of a dogfight. Cole's method stripped away the romance and replaced it with arithmetic. The ace was the man who understood energy states, who could calculate altitude against speed, potential against kinetic, patience against aggression. The kill was not the result of superior flying. It was the result of superior positioning, time to exploit an inevitable vulnerability. It was not pretty, but it worked. At Rheinbach, Franz Steiger sat in the officers' mess, nursing a glass of schnapps that had long since gone warm. Around him, other pilots spoke in low voices about transfers, about fuel shortages, about the rumors that the jet program would be scaled back due to logistical constraints. Everyone knew the real reason. The jets were being grounded not because of fuel or parts, but because flying them had become statistically suicidal. The Americans had found the seam, and they were working it with ruthless efficiency. Steiger thought about the P-38 he had encountered weeks earlier. The twin-boom silhouette dropping from altitude with mechanical precision. The sound of the engines, synchronized and final. The way it had climbed away after the attack, untouchable, already resetting for the next opportunity. He had flown against Spitfires, Mustangs, Thunderbolts. He had survived 2 years of combat by being faster, smarter, more aggressive than his opponents. But this was different. The P-38 crews were not trying to beat him in a fight. They were removing the fight entirely, reducing the engagement to a geometry problem with only one solution. And the solution was always the same. Boom, zoom, gone. One of the younger pilots, fresh from training, asked the question that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say aloud. Why don't we just stop using the forward bases? Pull back to fields with better defenses? An older pilot, a man with 30 kills and a face carved from exhaustion, answered before Steiger could. Because if we pull back, we lose reach. And if we lose reach, we lose relevance. The jet was supposed to extend our range, not shrink it. The room fell silent. The truth was inescapable. The Me-262 had been designed to dominate the sky, to intercept bombers at will, to restore German air superiority through technological supremacy. Instead, it had become a prisoner of its own logistics, forced to operate from fields it could not safely return to. They had been defeated not by weapons, but by arithmetic. Meanwhile, at 8th Air Force headquarters, analysts were already looking beyond the immediate tactical success. The lessons being learned over Germany would inform air combat doctrine for decades: energy management, vertical tactics, the exploitation of predictable vulnerabilities. These concepts would become foundational. But there was a deeper lesson, one that transcended tactics and entered the realm of philosophy. Technology, no matter how advanced, could not overcome the fundamental constraints of physics. Speed was meaningless without control. Power was meaningless without sustainability. The jet could outrun anything in the sky, but it could not outrun the need to land. And in that need, in that unavoidable moment of vulnerability, the entire advantage collapsed. One after-action report, filed by a P-38 squadron commander, summarized it with brutal clarity. The enemy possesses superior speed and climb rate. These advantages are irrelevant when exploited during phases of mandatory deceleration. Recommend continued emphasis on altitude positioning and disciplined engagement timing. The psychological impact of repeated circuit attacks appears to exceed the material damage inflicted. The psychological impact. The fear that came not from danger, but from inevitability. German pilots were not afraid of being shot down in combat. They were afraid of being executed during a procedure they could not avoid. Every landing became a test of nerve. Every approach became a gamble. And gambling over time produces predictable results. Cole flew his last mission of the war on March 3, 1945. By then, the doctrine he had developed was standard across all P-38 units in theater. The boom and zoom was no longer an experimental tactic. It was the tactic, taught to every new pilot, drilled in every briefing, executed in every engagement. He shot down his final aircraft that day, a Bf-109, not a jet, using the same principles. High altitude, patient orbit, disciplined dive, 2-second burst, clean zoom. The 109 pilot never saw him coming, never had a chance to react. It was not dramatic. It was not even particularly difficult. It was just mathematics, applied with precision. After landing, Cole walked to the operations tent and found a telegram waiting. Orders to return stateside for a training assignment. The war in Europe was ending. His part in it was done. He stood outside the tent, looking at the P-38's lined up along the taxiway, their twin booms silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. Ungainly machines, heavy, unforgiving. Not the fastest, not the most agile, not the most beloved, but effective. Brutally, undeniably effective. A crew chief approached, grinning. "Heard you're rotating out, Captain. Hell of a run." Cole nodded, folding the telegram. "The aircraft did the work. We just learned how to use it correctly." "That's not what the pilots say. They say you changed how we fight." Cole considered that for a moment. Changed how we fight. It sounded grand, but the reality was simpler. He had not invented anything new. Boom and zoom tactics were as old as aerial combat. What he had done was recognize when and where those tactics became not just effective, but inevitable. "We didn't change how we fight," Cole said finally. "We just stopped fighting the enemy's fight. We made them fight ours." The crew chief nodded, not entirely understanding but respecting the answer. Cole walked back to his quarters, packed his gear, and prepared for the long flight home. Behind him, the war continued its grinding conclusion. The jet still flew, but less often, less boldly. The P-38 still hunted, but with less resistance. The lesson had been taught. The lesson had been learned. Speed without wisdom is just another way to arrive at your death faster. Discipline, patience, and an understanding of when not to fight, these were the weapons that mattered. These were the tools that won wars. Years later, in a lecture at a fighter weapons school, Cole would be asked what he considered his greatest achievement in the war. The questioner expected him to cite his kill count, his decorations, his tactical innovations. Instead, Cole smiled and said, "I taught pilots to wait." The room was silent, confused. "Any fool can chase," he continued. "Any hotshot can dive after a target and hope for the best. But to wait, to hold position when every instinct screams to pursue, to trust the mathematics over the adrenaline, that's the hard part, and that's what wins." The truth arrived, and nobody in power dared to believe it, until they had no choice. April 1945. The war in Europe had 3 weeks left to live. At Rheinbach airfield, the Me-262's sat silent in their revetments, grounded not by battle damage but by the absence of fuel, parts, and purpose. The Luftwaffe's jet program, once heralded as the weapon that would turn the tide, had been reduced to a historical footnote written in twisted aluminum and lost potential. Franz Steiger stood beside one of the jets, his hand resting on the cold metal of the fuselage. Beautiful machine, fast, deadly, irrelevant. He thought about the American pilot who had nearly killed him in January. The P-38 that had dropped from the sun with mechanical certainty, fired with surgical precision, and climbed away untouched. He did not know the pilot's name. He did not need to. The name did not matter. The method was what mattered. In the weeks that followed that encounter, Steiger had flown 14 more sorties. Each time, the approach to landing had been an ordeal of scanning skies, listening for the twin-engine hum, timing his descent to avoid the window of maximum vulnerability. He had survived. But survival at the cost of constant fear was not victory. It was just a slower form of defeat. Now the war was ending, and Steiger found himself staring at the jet and wondering what could have been. If they had understood sooner, if they had adapted faster, if they had recognized that the weakness was not in the machine, but in the moment. But war does not grant second chances to those who learn too late. Across the Atlantic, Captain Avery Cole sat in a classroom at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. The war in Europe was over. The war in the Pacific would end soon. His students were young pilots, many of whom had never seen combat, all of whom would inherit the lessons paid for in blood over German skies. Cole stood at the front of the room, chalk in hand, drawing the familiar vectors on the board. Altitude, speed, energy, time. The same lesson he had taught dozens of times, refined through repetition, proven through results. The P-38 was not the best fighter of the war, he said, his voice calm and factual. It was not the fastest, not the most agile, not the easiest to fly, but it had one characteristic that mattered more than any of those things. He paused, letting the silence build. It could convert altitude into killing speed faster than almost anything else in the sky. And it could climb back out just as quickly. That made it the perfect ambush predator. Not a dog fighter, a hunter. One student raised his hand. "Sir, what if the enemy doesn't slow down? What if they just stay fast?" Cole smiled, the same thin smile he had worn over Germany when someone asked a question that revealed they were starting to understand. Then they don't land. And if they don't land, they don't matter. Every aircraft has to come down eventually. The only question is whether they do it on their terms or yours. He wrote on the board, the words large and clear. Don't pursue, anticipate. This is not about bravery, he continued. This is not about skill. This is about understanding that time is a weapon, and patience is how you load it. The Germans had faster planes they lost anyway. Speed without discipline is just noise. The students absorbed the lesson with the kind of quiet intensity that comes from knowing it might save their lives someday. This was not theory. This was distilled combat experience, the kind that could not be simulated or taught through books. After the class, one student approached Cole. a young lieutenant with the nervous energy of someone who had volunteered for something he did not fully understand yet. "Sir, can I ask you something?" Cole nodded. "Did you ever feel bad about shooting them down when they were landing, I mean? It seems unfair." Cole looked at the young man for a long moment, considering the question. It was not the first time someone had asked it. It would not be the last. "War is not fair," he said finally. "War is not a sporting match with rules and referees. War is about removing the enemy's ability to kill you and your friends. The Germans had jets. They used them to shoot down bombers full of men just trying to get home. We found a way to stop them. If that method lacked chivalry, I'll sleep just fine." The lieutenant nodded, still processing. "But here's what you need to understand," Cole continued, his voice softer now. "We didn't ambush them because we were cruel. We ambushed them because it worked. And in war, what works is what matters. You honor the enemy by taking them seriously, by using every advantage you have, by ending the fight as quickly as possible. That's respect. Everything else is just sentimentality." The lieutenant saluted and left. Cole watched him go, then returned to the empty classroom. He stood at the chalkboard, looking at the vectors and altitude blocks, the geometric proof of a lesson learned at 20,000 feet over hostile territory. The years that followed, the tactics developed by Cole and refined by countless other pilots would become doctrine. Energy management, vertical tactics, boom and zoom. The terms would change, the aircraft would evolve, but the underlying principles would remain constant. Physics did not care about national allegiance. Mathematics did not favor the brave over the cautious. The laws that governed aerial combat in 1945 would govern them in 1965, in 1985, in every future conflict where aircraft met in violent contest. The P-38 would be retired. The Me-262 would be studied in museums. But the lesson would endure. Cole retired from the Air Force in 1962 as a colonel, having trained 2 generations of fighter pilots in the art of patient aggression. He never wrote a memoir, never sought recognition beyond the quiet satisfaction of knowing his methods had saved lives and ended wars. In his final years, a historian interviewing him about the air war asked him what he remembered most vividly about his time in combat. Cole thought for a long time before answering. "The sound," he said finally. "The sound of the engines when you're in a dive. Both Allison screaming, the airframe humming, the world narrowing down to the gun sight and the target. Everything else falls away. It's pure, simple. You've done the math, you've waited for the moment, and now the moment is here. 2 seconds of fire, then the zoom. That sound, that's the sound of control." He paused, looking out the window at a sky empty of war. "They had faster planes," he said quietly. "But we had time. And in the end, time was the only weapon that mattered." The historian asked what advice he would give to modern fighter pilots, men who would fly machines Cole could barely imagine, engaging in battles that would be decided by computers and missiles rather than guns and geometry. Cole's answer was immediate. Don't pursue, anticipate. 3 words, a lifetime of meaning. Franz Steiger survived the war. He returned to civilian life, became an engineer, raised a family. He rarely spoke about his time in the cockpit, about the jets he flew or the missions he survived. But sometimes, on clear winter days, he would hear the sound of an aircraft overhead and his eyes would instinctively scan the sky, looking for the twin-boom silhouette that had taught him the hardest lesson of his life. Speed is not the same as safety. Power is not the same as control. And in war, the side that learns fastest wins. The Me-262 was a marvel. The P-38 was a workhorse. But the difference between them was not in the machines. It was in the men who flew them, and more importantly, in the men who understood when not to fly, when to wait, when to let the enemy come to them. The Germans built a weapon that could outrun anything. The Americans built a tactic that did not need to chase. In the end, the race was won by those who refused to run. The sky remembers everything, the victories, the losses, the moments of brilliance and the moments of failure. But if the sky could speak, it would tell you this: the most unbreakable walls are not made of steel, but of patience. And the deadliest weapon is not the one that strikes fastest, but the one that strikes when evasion is impossible. That was the lesson of the P-38. That was the lesson that ended the age of the jet before it could truly begin. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. Don't pursue. Anticipate.